Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention please? If there is a doctor, nurse, or any medical professionals on board, please make yourself known to one of our flight attendants. Your assistance is required. Thank you. The flight attendant called out to the passengers in economy class. Upon hearing such announcements implying ongoing medical emergencies, passengers on board felt uneasy. We have a medical emergency here. Are there any medical professionals? The urgent expression on the flight attendant face told of the seriousness of the situation. Yet, no passenger raised their hand. That's when, I'm here. Only one person raised his hand. I quit my job as a doctor after a certain incident and was on my way back to my hometown. Thank goodness. A passenger suddenly lost consciousness. What I saw when I was taken to the scene was a passenger lying motionless in the aisle. Please, help us. The tearful plea of the passenger's family. Seeing this, I couldn't help but respond. Of course. I promise. I nodded firmly, returning to my role as a doctor which I thought I had left behind. Thank you so much for earlier. Thanks to the prompt first aid, the patient regained consciousness safely afterward. As the plane arrived at the airport, the same flight attendant who had shouted for a doctor ran after me, stood up straight, and gave me a very polite words of appreciation. No, it was nothing. Just doing what I can do who happened to be there. Yet, to be thanked so sincerely like this, it's been a really long time. Feeling both embarrassed and a warm sensation in my chest. John, scratched my head and looked down at the floor of the airport. That's when it happened. That habit of scratching your head, it hasn't changed, has it, John? Huh? Startled to be called by name all of a sudden, I looked up to see a flight attendant with glamorous makeup, wearing an equally glamorous smile. You're John, right? From first high school. How do you know that? Realizing she had even mentioned my high school, I stared at her in shock. Then, don't stare too much. The lighting in the plane is dim, so I tend to put on too much makeup, she muttered shyly, her face turning a hint of red. I, for one, remembered that habit well. Could it be Emma? Correct. This time, the flight attendant, who now seemed a bit younger, flashed an innocently bright smile. It turns out she was Emma, my childhood friend. Emma. Really, Emma? Yeah. Didn't recognize me because of the heavy makeup. No. You've become so beautiful. I didn't recognize you. Oh, come on. It's a bit embarrassing to hear such compliments with such a serious face. It wasn't flattery. Emma really has become beautiful. We grew up in a small rural town. Even among us, Emma was particularly plain and unremarkable. Perhaps conscious of that, she always walked with her back hunched and her head down. But now, she's completely transformed into a sophisticated city woman. Emma, a flight attendant. Surprised that a country girl like me is doing such a glamorous job. No, it's okay. I'm totally used to that reaction by now. The two of them start walking down the hallway alongside Emma, who seems to be smiling a little. The way he walked with his head straight and his back straight, he looked like a completely different person. And indeed, she was very beautiful. For a moment, I forgot she was my childhood friend, mesmerized by her dignified profile. But then, the next moment, I suddenly came back to my senses. John, you became a doctor. Wow, you really made your dream come true. John. Emma stopped and tilted her head when I suddenly stopped walking. No, it's not like that. Huh? I got fired. So, I'm not a doctor anymore. What do you mean? Staring at the floor, I remembered the long, empty days I had lived through, and the fact that a life was lost because of me. After graduating from a medical school in New York, began working at its affiliated hospital, a so-called university hospital with over 1,000 beds. The number of patients relying on us was enormous, as was the number of doctors working. Among them, I couldn't say I was outstanding. I spent days diligently performing outpatient consultations and night shifts without being appointed as the in charge of surgeries. My time was often filled with colleagues' sneers, suggesting that he's going nowhere. That changed when I was 32. It all started with a word from a superior. John, would you like to take on this surgery? Excuse me. What did you just say, sir? That superior was Professor Smith, the head of surgery. Despite joining from an external hospital, he climbed to the top as a professor. a skilled surgeon with a track record of successfully performing numerous difficult surgeries. He was an ideal boss, taking notice even of me, who wasn't getting ahead. That's when he proposed, "How about you take on a certain surgery as the lead surgeon?" "That's impossible for me." "Why?" "You're diligent and handle your daily duties seriously. I trust you enough to want to entrust it to you. But I still lack experience." "Even without experience, you've put an effort that matches it, haven't you?" "Thank you." He had been watching over me, the times I had practiced surgery alone in between daily duties. "Give it a try. It's okay, I'll be there to support you." "Yes." Later, I faced my first surgery, and the result was a great success. This became a confidence boost for me as a doctor, and I started to volunteer for surgeries. Even amid the busy days, I continued to study and practice more. Eventually, after successfully performing several difficult surgeries, I became known as a young genius surgeon by the age of 38. However, once again, it was Professor Smith's words that changed my fate. "John, from now on, you'll be my assistant for a while." "Huh?" Just like when he entrusted me with my first surgery, Professor Smith smiled warmly and patted my shoulder. Already having established myself as a surgeon, I couldn't believe his words. Why would I, of all people, be an assistant now? Seeing right through me, he put on a slightly stern face. "I hate to say it, but haven't you been getting a bit carried away lately?" "Huh?" "Being young and called a genius or renowned doctor, I get the feeling you've become a bit too arrogant. Don't you think, or are you not aware?" "Well, it's okay. You're still young, you can start over any time." "Professor." With my head hung in embarrassment, Professor Smith gently patted my shoulder. "Go back to the basics and learn surgery from scratch, under me." "Yes." I was deeply grateful to the professor. By speaking harshly, he made me realize how conceited I had become. Not only did he not give up on me, but he also taught me the right way to be a doctor through his own actions. However, that was a mistake. During my first surgery as an assistant, I realized the truth, the real intention of Professor Smith. "Now, you'll take over the surgery from here." "Huh?" Before me was a patient, just opened up for surgery. Yet, unbelievably, Professor Smith was taking off his gloves and heading towards the exit. "Wait." In my panic, I called out to him, and he turned his head, his smile visible even above his mask. "I'm leaving the rest to you." It was a highly difficult surgery, but somehow, it ended in success. Hearing the news, Professor Smith nodded with a satisfied look. "I see. I believed you would be fine, John." After that, he always left the operating room right after the surgery started, saying, "The rest is up to you." And then, I suppose you understand by now, even this surgery was completed by me in the end. Right. Yes. It was an unspoken agreement at the workplace. Even if an assistant succeeded in a surgery, the credit went to Professor Smith. For over a decade, he had been using talented doctors as assistants, letting them perform surgeries in his stead. No one dared to challenge a surgical professor with strong trust from the director by taking unnecessary risks. And I was one of them. The next surgery is going to be challenging as well. I'm expecting good results, you know. Yes. Professor Smith flashed a sinister smile, revealing his true nature. At that moment, if I had prioritized justice over self-preservation, perhaps that patient wouldn't have lost their life. 3 years had passed since I started performing surgeries under Professor Smith's directive. One day, the hospital was hit by an emergency. "The next patient is coming in. Fully occupied here. Line them up in the hallway. Order additional blood packs, quickly." The urgent voices of doctors and nurses echoed throughout the surgical floor as a flurry of people ran about. The urgent hallways were overflowing with severely injured patients, covered in blood. The moans and cries for help, "Help, it hurts," were like something out of hell. A massive multi-vehicle accident involving over 10 cars and trucks had occurred. The injured were rushed to our hospital, which was nearby. Minor injuries over there for first aid. Severe cases come this way. Got it, understood. As a mid-level surgeon, I was directing the resident doctors while prioritizing the treatment of severe cases. But the patients kept coming, one after another. Staff from other departments also came to help, and the hospital united to save lives. Professor Smith was nowhere to be seen. Where did he go, that man? "What are you doing, John?" Our voices overlapped as we looked around at the chaos. Where have you been at a time like this? And you? What are you doing at such a critical time? Huh? Our conversation didn't match. As I looked puzzled, the professor, as if he couldn't see the tragedy in front of him, calmly stated, "You are scheduled for surgery now. Hurry up and come." "What are you talking about?" I confronted the professor with a voice that echoed down the hallway. Yet, even as I grabbed his lapel, his expression didn't change a bit. He firmly grasped my wrist. "I told you today's surgery is important. You know what? It's the president of Greenleaf Products." That meant prioritizing a VIP patient who was not in immediate danger over the severely injured in front of us. If the surgery was successful, a large donation would be received. That would solidify his position as the next hospital director. "Come on, the patient is waiting." All the while, he smirked with a vile smile. Professor Smith pulled me along, trying to take me to the operating room. I shook off his hand, suppressing the nausea. "I won't go. I have an emergency surgery to perform." "What did you say?" "The lead surgeon is supposed to be you. Then you should do the surgery yourself." Ignoring the astonished Professor Smith, I carried the patient to the operating room, even as the Professor Smith kept urging me to come over here quickly during the emergency surgery. I ignored all those calls and focused solely on the patient in front of me. Eventually, the surgery was successfully completed, and the patient's life was saved. When I finally took a moment to breathe, I realized that the professor's urging had stopped over an hour ago. "Professor, I'm sorry for being late. The surgery. After all, I was supposed to participate as an assistant." Out of a sense of duty, I rushed to the operating room where the professor was. "Then, you really took your time, John." Without looking at me, Professor Smith muttered quietly. The operating room was enveloped in a heavy atmosphere. The reason was, no way. Despite being a surgery with a high success rate, the patient lying in the center of the room had already experienced cardiac arrest. According to the nurses present, it was entirely Professor Smith's mistake. An incision in the wrong place led to massive bleeding in the patient. Many people witnessed Professor Smith's mistake. However, when it came time to explain to the family, it was claimed that I had performed the surgery and made the mistake that cost the patient's life. "I will never forgive you." The face of the grieving family, shouting through tears, is still etched in my memory. In the end, the hospital and the family reached a settlement, and I was not held responsible for the mistake. But, John, if only you had followed me, there would have been no problem. In that sense, it is indeed your mistake. While handing me the termination notice, Professor Smith sneered. He blamed his mistake on me, isolating me within the surgery department. And in the end, I was expelled from the hospital. I performed my duties as a doctor, helping patients in need. Yet, that led to the loss of another patient's life. What should I have done? What was my job, really? Feeling cornered, I found myself on a plane heading back to my hometown, wanting to return to the home I hadn't visited in over 10 years, desiring to see my family I hadn't seen for so long immediately. With that single-minded intent, John, Emma peered at me with concern as I fell silent. Snapping back to reality, I replied, "Sorry, just lost in thought." "Are you okay? You look really pale." "Just, a lot going on." I explained to Emma that I quit my job and I'm heading back to my hometown. "Going back home? Does that mean you're taking over the family business?" "Probably." "Wow. I try to go back as much as I can between flights." "Does that mean I'll get to see you all the time?" "Huh?" Was that her way of saying she wanted to see me? Emma's excitement made my heart skip a beat, even as she smiled and laughed beautifully. Oblivious to how I felt, she continued earnestly, "Really? It's been years since we last met, John. Hey, I'm off tomorrow. If you're up for it, why not gather with everyone who's still around here?" "Oh, no, I'd rather not. Not really in the mood for that." "Oh, I get it. Everyone has those moments, right? Sorry, got a bit carried away there." "No, it's fine. It's just like old times," I thought nostalgically. Even when I was feeling down, she didn't pry too much, always trying to cheer me up with positive words. Indeed, she is Emma. "Hey, make sure you talk a lot with your dad." "Huh? Your dad seemed lonely by himself. He must have been waiting for you to come back, wanting to see you." Promise, she said with a bright smile. Emma waved her hand slightly and walked away, pulling her suitcase behind her. As I watched her confident figure leaving, I thought to myself, my dad, waiting for me. It felt unbelievably ticklish. A complex feeling, but not an unpleasant one. Because my dad and I hadn't spoken since we had a falling out 16 years ago. My family's home has been a farming household for generations. From spring to summer, we grew potatoes, and from fall to winter, cabbages among other things. The one mainly managing the vast fields was my dad, Robert. In the past, my mother also farmed with him. When I was in middle school, she suddenly passed away due to illness. So, as a student, I went to school on weekdays and helped my dad on weekends. Until I expressed my intention in my first year of college that I want to apply for medical school. Wow. This, my dad. It was obvious, but I couldn't help but admire it. The summer harvest season just ended, and it's time to prepare for planting the next crop. As far as the eye can see, beautifully maintained fields stretch on endlessly. Did he finish all this alone? Amazing. Being away has made me realize how incredible my dad is. Having worked myself, I now understand the difficulty of continuing the same job. When I see my dad, the first thing I want to tell him is just that. I wonder where dad is. Maybe over there. The moment I stepped onto the farm, that's when it happened. Stay out. A sharp, harsh shout came from behind me. Surprised, I turned around, and there he was. Dad, what are you doing back here now? Get out. His work clothes were covered in dust. With a towel around his neck and a worn cap on his head, he looked exactly the same as before. Yet, he seemed angrier at me than he had been when we had our falling out 16 years ago. Dad, look, I quit my job. That's why. So what? Came back to beg for money. What? That really got to me. Wasn't he supposed to have been waiting for me, wanting to see me? The more I was happy about it, the more shocking and infuriating my dad's attitude became. Hey, are you still mad about the past? Work's getting disrupted. I don't have any money here. Go back to New York. That's no way to talk to your son. I squatted down beside my dad, who was crouched in the field pulling weeds. If I'm in the way of his work, would he listen to me after it's done? Hoping for that. Half concerned for my slightly shrunken back dad. But my dad's response was his dirt-covered hands. Whoa. Pushed hard from behind, I tumbled to the ground. I was just trying to help. What are you doing? I protested, looking up at him, but he coldly said, no thanks. Why? It must be tough for you alone, Dad. Then, why did you become a doctor? Huh? Abandoning your family and hometown, you selfishly went off to New York. And now, you've come back because you're tired of being a doctor. What a disgrace. Someone like you has no right to touch the fields that our family has protected for generations. Just leave, now, Dad. After that, no matter what I said, my dad completely ignored me. Reluctantly, I went up to my parents' house and, while praying in front of my mother's picture, I said, I'm sorry for not coming home for so long. All the while, I just waited for my father to finish his work and come home. When I first confided that I wanted to become a doctor, my father opposed it vehemently. Who's going to take over if you're gone? Are you trying to ruin the family business that's been passed down for generations? There's no way you could become a doctor, he said. I remember retorting with something equally harsh. I've always hated farming. It's such an uncool job. If it's going bankrupt, let it be. You only took over because you had no other choice. Being not so bright, I said. It almost escalated to a physical fight, and I stopped helping my father with any of the farm work. I'll definitely get into maid school. I became determined and threw myself into studying because of that. Also, because my father had thrown away all the work clothes and boots I used, without asking. That incident was the last straw, and we stopped talking altogether. Even when I finally got into med school, I just silently left the acceptance letter on the desk. Whether he saw it or not, I never knew. Yikes, what time is it? Waking up to a noise, the house was completely dark. It seems I had fallen asleep in front of the picture of my mother while waiting for my father. Guess I haven't been able to sleep much lately. Maybe because I felt secure at my parents' house. I felt like I had a good night's sleep for the first time in a while. Stretching as I stood up, I noticed light leaking through the gaps in the doors. Beyond the altar, there was the living room where my father always had his evening drink. "Dad, what's that?" As I slid the door open, what my father was drinking wasn't alcohol. It was a glass of water, and what appeared to be prescription medication. "What's the medication for? Are you feeling okay?" Ignoring my question, my father quickly swallowed the pills with water, and then tightly gripped the empty blister pack as he stood up. "It's none of your business. How can you say that? I am your son, after all." "Son." His voice was as cold as it had been during the day, rejecting me as if to say, "I have no such person. I don't want your concern. Going off to New York to do as you please, then coming back as you please. I don't remember having a selfish, shameless person like you as my son. Why are you being so harsh? Look, I'm sorry about the past. I don't need your apologies. I don't even want to talk to you, Dad." The more I tried to speak, the more adamant my father became. I was happy to see my father again, despite everything. Far from it, my father acted as if he never wanted to see me again. The disparity in feelings was unbearably sad. "I don't need to know what happened, but it's clear you couldn't cut it as a doctor. You've shamelessly run back home," he said. My indignation at him not knowing what I'd been through, the sorrow of him not even trying to understand my situation, the despair of being rejected by my father after 16 years. Overwhelmed by various emotions, I stood frozen as my father walked past me without a word. Hearing the sharp sound of the door closing behind me, I felt all my strength leave my body and slumped down. I wish I had never come back. At that moment, I hadn't realized yet. There was a message on my phone. "Can we meet tomorrow? Just the two of us. John, are you okay?" The next day, at the meeting spot, as soon as she appeared right on time at the neighborhood park, Emma's face clouded over. "You look worse than yesterday." "Huh? Had a bit of everything yesterday," I said with a forced smile. But then, suddenly, Emma's figure blurred before my eyes. Feeling something wet on my cheek, I reached up to touch it. "Huh?" I was crying. Tears kept overflowing uncontrollably. "Sorry, Emma. Maybe today's not a good day." "John, hey. If you're okay with it, wanna talk?" "No. I'm fine now. I've never seen you cry before, John. It must be something big, huh?" Honestly, I was on the verge of breaking down. A series of events had piled up in a short time, and especially last night, being rejected by my father was the last straw. On one hand, I didn't want to see anyone, but on the other, I longed for someone to listen. So, I took up Emma's offer. Actually, as Emma sat down next to me on the bench, I started my story. About the days when I was used by a professor, my achievements stolen from me, how the worst-case scenario happened, and I was scapegoated and kicked out of a hospital, and the dreadful reunion with my father. All through my long story, I had been looking down and hadn't noticed at all. Next to me, Emma was silently crying, shedding far more tears than I could compare. Emma. Startled by my reaction, Emma, with tears wetting her cheeks, managed a crumpled smile, but it quickly distorted as new tears began to overflow. "Are you okay?" "I'm sorry, John. It's you who's suffering." "No, I'm sorry. It's because of what I said." "That's not it. My father wasn't waiting for my return. So, last night I thought, I wish I hadn't come back. But after a night's sleep, my thoughts changed. It was shocking, but I'm glad we talked. It's like I've moved on. So, then, yeah, I'll surrender my medical profession." There were many times when I thought, I want to quit. But I clung to my job as a doctor because of the guilt towards my father, for pursuing it despite his opposition. But if my father no longer sees me as his son, then I don't need to worry about what he thinks. Besides, I no longer have the confidence to continue working as a doctor. I don't know anymore why I was so desperate. The more I tried, the more I was used by unscrupulous people, alienated by those around me, and in the end, to take someone's life. It's not your fault, John. It was. I took on surgeries for years because I didn't want to be disliked by the professor. Because of that, the professor's skills deteriorated, and that mistake happened. I will never forget the fact that a life was lost. I will live carrying the bereaved family's words and sorrow, even if I take up a different job. John. After the heavy conversation, Emma seemed unsure of what to say. She opened her mouth several times, then closed it, and finally, with effort, murmured, "You know, I was worried you might scold me for saying this, John." I hesitated to speak. Clasping her fists on her lap, as if making up her mind, Emma began. "I've thought about giving up on life." "What?" "Actually, I used to work at a different company before my current airline. At my previous workplace, there was this one colleague I just couldn't come to like. I was always subjected to terrible words. Everything from my appearance to my work was criticized. Eventually, even other colleagues who were initially on my side started drifting away from me." Emma reached her mental limit and quit the company as if fleeing. After that, she returned to her parents' house and spent about a year living a reclusive life, barely eating and unable to tack to her family. But still, I couldn't come to hate the job of a flight attendant. The days I spent with that senior still make me shiver when I remember them. But I loved seeing the smiles of the passengers. I loved being proud of myself working as a flight attendant. How about now? It's really fun. Without a hint of hesitation, Emmy answered with a beaming smile. Her smile was so bright and cheerful, it was hard to believe she had gone through such tough times. Of course, there are sometimes hard moments, but the fun times far outweigh those, so I'm giving it my all at my current company. So, John, don't quit being a doctor. I wish I could tell my past self, quit that place right away and go somewhere else. Because there's not just one airline in the world. And aren't there countless hospitals in the world? The world is vast, so there isn't just one place where we belong. You can choose again and again and restart your life, as long as you have that energy. Emma's words carried weight precisely because they came from someone who had once nearly lost the will to live. As long as your body and spirit are healthy, you can restart any number of times. And that's what your job supports, right? Right. I really think it's a noble profession. When you help those passengers on the plane, it was really cool. My job. It was like a light bulb moment. Suddenly, it felt like the world opened up in front of me. I remembered why I wanted to become a doctor. The first time I thought, I want to be a doctor, and the feelings I had then came rushing back. When my mother fell suddenly, I was devastated. Even more so when she passed away in no time despite the treatment. I never want to feel this way again. Nor do I want anyone else to. That's why I defied my father's strong opposition and pursed my dream to be a doctor. And even after becoming a doctor, I never skipped on studying and practicing surgery. But that wasn't for patients. I was the only one among my peers who struggled to be trusted with surgeries, which frustrated me. That frustration gradually changed my reason for trying hard. From saving patients and their families to being recognized for my skills by others. That's why Professor Smith noticed me. He exploited my desire for recognition. Though, maybe I'll try hard again. For someone else's sake. But can I really do it? Feeling unsure, Emma smiled at me and said, "John, you'll be just fine." And with a smile that seemed to share her courage, she firmly grasped my hand. Perhaps even God was watching over my determination. The very next day, a significant trial was awaiting me. It happened when I was feeling too uncomfortable at home. So I took a bus downtown early in the morning and aimlessly killed time. By chance, as I passed by the only hospital in town, I casually glanced towards the parking lot and was shocked by what I saw. "Hey, are you okay?" I rushed over because there was a man leaning against a pickup truck, clutching his chest, and I arrived just in time. The man collapsed to the ground as if a string had been cut. "Hand in there. Does your chest hurt? Let me see." I carefully lifted the man to lay him on his back to check his condition. At that moment, I felt all the blood drain from my body. Dad. The man lying in front of me was my father, who had ignored me this morning and gone to the field alone. "Can you hear me? It's me, Dad." My father didn't seem to notice me, not responding to my call, clutching his chest and groaning in pain. His labored breathing, the cold sweat covering his forehead, the pain in his chest, and most importantly, the prescription that had fallen beside him. All these led me to one diagnosis. "Dad, your medicine. You carry it with you, right, for when you have an attack." While calling out to my father, I frantically searched through his possible belongings like his bag and wallet. When I found a pill case in his pocket, I forced the pill inside his mouth. "Is everything all right?" Just as his pained expression seemed to ease a bit, a nurse who had spotted us rushed over. I asked her to give immediate care, and I followed my father on a stretcher into the hospital. There, I learned my hunch was correct. Thanks to your accurate first aid, his condition is now stable. Are you in the medical field? The person who treated my father was an elderly doctor with gray hair, the attending physician. He was shorter than me, but I sensed an extraordinary dignity. Then I noticed the name Dr. Johnson on his chest plate, along with the title director. Instead of answering his question, I asked, "Doctor, does my father have angina?" "You said father. So you are." "I'm John, his son. I'm a doctor, though still inexperienced." When I answered, Director Johnson murmured, "I see," as if he understood something. Then, he proceeded to explain. "My father has been suffering from angina for over 10 years. This isn't the first time my father has had an attack, is it? There have been several times before. Fortunately, until now, the attacks were mild, and he either took his medication, nitroglycerin, by himself, or a neighbor who found him called an ambulance. However, this was the first time he had such a severe attack, and from the tests we just did, we found that his condition has progressed more than expected, and immediate action is necessary before his heart weakens further." Regretting the delay in discovery, Director Johnson informed me with a stern expression. "Action? Does that mean surgery?" "Yes. Considering his age, it's better to do it right away, but it's probably too late for a catheter. Angina is a condition where the coronary arteries, which supply blood to the heart muscle, get clogged, impairing heart function. There are mainly two types of surgeries for angina. One is catheter surgery, where a thin tube is inserted into the coronary artery to improve blood flow in the blocked area. However, as the disease progresses, catheter treatment may not suffice, and in such cases, coronary artery bypass surgery is performed, which involves connecting the blocked part of the artery to the aorta with a new vessel, creating a new pathway for blood flow. Does my father need bypass surgery? Then, please do it as soon as possible." Clinging to his lab coat, the director faced me with the reality. This hospital has no precedent for performing bypass surgery. Moreover, they don't have any cardiac surgeons with experience in performing such surgeries. "John, as a doctor, you understand that bypass surgery requires high skill and speed." I regained some composure with the director's words. The other doctors nearby, knowing the difficulty of bypass surgery, awkwardly shifted their gaze away from me. So I raised my hand high so everyone present could see. "I'll do it. John, my specialty is cardiac surgery. Director, may I perform the surgery on my father?" Confusion and murmurs spread among those around. It was natural for a sudden plea from a patient's family member wanting to perform the surgery themselves. None of the people here knew that I had once made a name for myself as a cardiac surgeon. I have experience with bypass surgeries several times. Please let me do it. Even so, we don't have the facilities. As I pleaded, the puzzled atmosphere spread even further. Just as I bit my lip, thinking it was no use, that's when, "I'll take responsibility." A solemn voice echoed in the room, and everyone looked up as if jolted. The voice belonged to Director Johnson, who looked around at his subordinate doctors and continued, "I'll take care of the equipment. Can't you trust me on this?" "But, Director, John, as the director of this hospital, I can entrust the surgery to you, who were once called a genius surgeon." How did he know about that? I was wide-eyed, and the director looked straight at me. His face showed no hesitation, only trust in me, and he strongly appealed to me. I was the only one who could save my father. I will definitely save my father. So, I ask for your cooperation. Of course, we'll do everything we can. Director Johnson gave me a firm nod, and then, the surgery preparations were completed in no time. On the day of my father's surgery, he patted my shoulder, which was tense with nervousness. "It'll be fine. You will surely succeed, John." Yes. The director's strong encouragement, the strong determination to definitely save my father, and the belief in myself, having overcome numerous surgeries. With that in my heart, I stepped into the operating room, and then, the surgery, which lasted for 5 hours, ended in a great success, receiving high praise from Director Johnson himself. "Just as I've heard, John, You're truly exceptional. While I was taking a break and watching over my sleeping father after the surgery, Director Johnson visited the room and said that with a gentle smile. Did you know about me? Your father, Robert, and I go way back. I always nagged him not to drink too much. He never listened to this stubborn man, though. Director Johnson knew I had become a doctor from talking to my father. I braced myself, expecting to hear complaints about how I abandoned my parent to go to New York, or he's a disgrace to his parents. He was worried about you. But only at first. As you started making a name for yourself, he would bring me clippings from medical journals and newspapers. Reminiscing about those times, Director Johnson looked at my father's face. Then, he shared an unexpected truth. He'd say, "My son is in this, take a look," showing them to me many times. He was so proud, telling me what a great job you've done, that John is his pride and joy. I couldn't believe my ears. I never imagined my father would say such things. It was hard to believe. After all, for 16 years, my father had hated me for leaving him to go to New York. He probably did want you to continue the family business. Even after you went to New York, he would say, "If I ended in my generation, I won't be able to face our ancestors." That's why he couldn't openly support you. But he was the one who rejoiced in your success more than anyone else. Can't you understand that, Dad? Then why did he say such horrible things 2 days ago? I wanted to wake him up and confront him right away. Yet, seeing my father's sleeping face was truly a rare moment for me. I kept watching him by his side until he woke up. Why are you still not back in New York? Even though he should still be groggy from anesthesia. As soon as he woke up, my father glared sharply at me. Well, because I was the one who performed your surgery. I can't leave until I make sure there are no complications. Unnecessary. When I reported that I would be the one to perform the surgery, my father initially refused, saying he wouldn't undergo the surgery. He said he'd rather his heart stop right there than be indebted to such a disgrace to his family. It was Director Johnson who convinced him. You can have a father-son fight if you're in the afterlife. I worked hard on the surgery so we can have those father-son fights again. There's nothing left for us to talk about. There must be something to talk about. No, there has to be. For example, who's going to take care of the farm while you're in the hospital? At that moment, my father's eyes flew open wide. If I hadn't quickly held his shoulder down, he would have jumped up despite being on strict bed rest. If you have time to mess with the form, see more patients. So, the truth comes out. You should have just said that from the start. What? I calmed my father, now red with excitement, and got him back into bed. And I made it clear. That's what I was thinking about while my father was sleeping. Was it all for me? Is that why you said those things? No. To send me back to New York. To make sure I didn't quit being a doctor to become a farmer. No. I won't say such things anymore. I'm going to continue being a doctor. I want to keep being a son you can be proud of. What? When my father was at a loss for words, opening and closing his mouth, Director Johnson came in for his rounds and opened the curtain, stopping to look at my father's face. Then, he gave a wry smile. Maybe it's time to be honest, Robert. Your son is smart. He already understands everything. My father has always looked up to the director, almost like an older brother, and still couldn't stand up to him. He sighed resignedly and looked down at his hands. I wasn't smart. I thought taking over the family business was all I could do. I never dreamed my son would want to become a doctor, let alone actually become one. It must have been tough. That's quite an achievement. Yeah, it was tough. Of course, I couldn't rely on my father, so I managed to graduate from university through scholarships and part-time jobs. After graduation, the real challenges began. But with my father's words, the past 16 years felt redeemed all at once. I'm proud. You are my pride. So, don't quit. Yeah. You don't have to take over the farm. Go back to New York, fulfill your job. Then, you can come to visit occasionally. Yeah. Just when I thought my father had finally opened up, he was still the same stubborn man. His last words meant, come back and visit sometimes. I can understand that now. But John, do you have any plans to stay here? At Director Johnson's words, my eyes widened. You're going to be looking for a job in New York, right? If you're willing, I'd like you to work at this hospital. You've shown us your skills." Director. I couldn't help but glance back at my father. He had pretended to be asleep, but eventually, he nodded as if to say, "Go for it." So, I said, "Please, count on me." Likewise. We shook hands firmly. And so, I stayed in my hometown, working as a surgeon under Director Johnson. A month later, my father was still in the hospital but was recovering well. Taking over as my father's primary physician from the director, I was doing well at work every day. In our community, where there are many elderly people, there are quite a few who have concerns about their hearts. The reputation that a renowned heart specialist from New York has come was spreading day by day, and patients from inside and outside the town were flocking to the hospital. As the head of the newly established cardiology outpatient department, I was striving every day to rescue as many patients as possible from their anxieties. However, during such times, that person appeared before me again, calling me out to such a backwater place. "I'm busy." What was Dr. Johnson thinking? Sitting heavily on the bench in the hallway, the person vented their irritation. "Hey, is the doctor not available yet? Hurry up and call him. The director is very busy. They should be arriving shortly." Such an unfriendly attitude. "Have you forgotten the favor you owe me, John? Please keep your voice down. There are patients around, Professor Smith." "Yes. Who is that person?" "Professor Smith, who had once framed me for a medical error and ultimately got me expelled from the hospital. Since he was a mentor during my medical school days, I had to come when he said he needed to talk. But this really is a backwater hospital. Looks like the staff isn't very capable either. And to think you're still practicing medicine after all this. I thought for sure you'd have given up after that incident." Professor Smith's loud voice made nearby doctors and nurses turn their attention towards us. As if he had been waiting for this moment, he smirked and raised his voice even further. "Can you believe it? The guy who was accused of a medical error is still shamelessly practicing medicine. Do these people and patients know about it, John?" "Professor, what about it? If you haven't come clean yet, should I do the honors?" "No need to be shy, we go way back, don't we?" I realized then that Professor Smith was seeking revenge. He must have been upset about not becoming the director because of me, and now he was trying to ruin my place here too. But the person Professor Smith knew no longer exists. It's not just him who recognizes me, and I know now there are more important things than just proving my skills. I did not commit a medical error. What? The error was made by you, Professor. I was framed for it. I plan to make this truth public. What are you talking about, you? Spreading such baseless lies. It's not a lie. Whether it's a lie or not, those who know my skills, the patients, and my colleagues here, they know the truth. Turning around, I locked eyes with many doctors and nurses. Attracted by the commotion, more than twice the number from before had gathered around us. All of them smiled and nodded in unison, showing their belief in me. Everyone believe in me. I will start over as many times as necessary. I will never give up being a doctor. Are you prepared to continue this fight with me, Professor Smith? Humph, insolent, to think someone like you. Well said, John. Dr. Johnson. Professor Smith turned around in shock as Director Johnson appeared from behind, gripping his shoulder. Then, the director stepped in front of the professor and suddenly punched him in the face. Ouch. Does it hurt? But when you think of the pain of the patients or the sorrow of their families, this can hardly be called pain. You fool. Doctor, I've heard everything from John. The loss of patients' lives wasn't due to a medical error. It was your arrogance, thinking only of climbing the career ladder and stopping to hone your skills. And it's my responsibility too, because I recommended someone like you to that hospital. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, doctor. Do you even understand who you should be apologizing to? Hopeless. Director Johnson turned his back on the professor, his face showing complete disappointment. I'll have to inform the director over there. As he muttered this, Professor Smith's face went pale and he collapsed to the ground. Afterward, when the director exposed years of wrongdoing, everything Professor Smith had built crumbled to the ground. He was immediately dismissed from the hospital, and his bad reputation spread so wide that he was effectively ousted from the medical community. Furthermore, the truth about the medical errors became clear, and he is currently being sued by the families of the victims. Although the verdict has not yet been given, it's likely he will have to pay for his crimes alone, without a single lie. By the time my father was about to be discharged, Emma came to visit during a break in her busy schedule. "Hi, it's been a while." "Oh, Emma, sorry to trouble you when you're busy. Are you taking care of yourself, eating well?" "Yes, thanks to you." Happening to be there after work, I stood flabbergasted, because my father was smiling. The description of him as a friendly neighbor is perfect, even though he only shows his face to my son, me. When I was shut away with a troubled heart, your father would often bring vegetables over. Gradually, we started talking. I recovered thanks to him. That happened. "Hey, Sean, can we talk for a bit?" Emma, you dreamed of being a flight attendant in elementary school, right? You really made it happen. You remembered, even that old story. Sitting on a bench in the courtyard, Emma smiled shyly. "I only told you my real dream. I thought others would laugh." "Is that so? But it's impressive. Not many can achieve their childhood dreams. You must have worked really hard." "Yeah, I almost gave up several times, but I couldn't." "Do you know why?" Looking straight at me, Emma said seriously. "Because you were there, John." "Me?" "Yeah. Even when everyone laughed at the idea of medical school, you, a high school student, kept striving, focused, moving straight towards your dream. Watching you gave me courage. Even during my university years and job hunting, you supported me. It's strange, isn't it? When the person you like works hard, it makes you want to work hard too." I was startled by the unexpected words. Emma, her cheeks flushed, revealed, "I actually planned to confess to you at our high school graduation, but I had moved to New York before the graduation, carrying my feelings for her for 16 years. I had another dream. It was to become a full-fledged flight attendant, reunite with John, who became a doctor, and then, it's strange. Emma in her flight attendant uniform looked glamorous and beautiful, but now, in her modest attire, almost close to her natural look, she seemed even more beautiful than before. Can I fulfill that dream?" "Yeah." When I nodded, Emma's eyes moistened as she smiled. "Thank you." Her dream was to become the girlfriend of the person she had always loved. The moment that dream came true, she was the most beautiful I had ever seen her. I don't think I'll ever forget the best smile I saw at that moment. A year later, we get married. My father was the happiest for us, declaring unusually high-spiritedly that he will definitely give a speech at the wedding. However, that will have to wait for a while. We're both busy with work, but we'll definitely have it someday. Stay healthy until then, Dad. That's right, Robert, father-in-law. Any dream can come true as long as you're healthy. Emma's right. And having such a skilled doctor close by is reassuring. Then, as your physician, I advise you to cut down on your alcohol intake a bit recently. I understand. Without health, dreams cannot be fulfilled. Saying this, my father gave her a smile, and Emma and I exchanged glances. Then, both of us smiled at my father, agreeing, exactly. Right after this marriage proposal, Emma left for her next flight. I looked up at the sky from the hospital window, always imagining Emma working as a flight attendant. It makes me feel like I can work hard as a doctor, as much as needed. Even if you lose sight of your dreams or goals once, you can always start over, as many times as necessary. As long as you can regain the feelings you held when you first embraced those dreams and continue to strive. And as long as your mind and body are healthy. Helping with that is my job as a doctor. I want to continue to be proud of choosing this profession and continuing with it.